Hello there, I'm Eleanor Fairford. I'm the Deputy Director for Incident Management in the NCSE, and I'm joined today with great thanks to Mary Haigh, CISO from BAE Systems. Thank you so much for joining me today at short notice, I really appreciate it. So my first question is really thinking about when an incident happens, trying to encourage organisations to come forward in the interests of transparency and talk about what has happened to them openly. We find in NCSE something that's very important. I wonder if that's something you could reflect on from your own experience.
Yeah, I kind of look at it from two different angles. One is we're part of a community and we need to feel that all the time. And if there is an incident that happens or a near miss, then the more we share that with each other, the more that we grow our collective learning, so we can share what went wrong, what went right, get some thoughts about others and what they might have done, and what, so that is that collective learning. And all the forums that we do have a lot of forums already for doing that kind of thing, from CISP to ADME to Tech UK. There's all sorts of different groups where people come together and have that discussion. The other aspect, I think, is actually reputation. So for BAE's reputation, if we stay silent on what can be a very obvious cyber attack on us, it doesn't look good. We have to show that we're proactively managing it and be able to demonstrate at a high level how we're doing that to the market. So just from a share price point of view, I think it's very useful to be as open as you possibly can be.
That's brilliant, that's excellent, you're absolutely right. Like to try and hide it and for it to come out later on would actually be far worse in the long run, wouldn't it? So better to show openness and transparency. And with regards to all those forums for sharing what has happened, that's a really useful way to kind of close the loop of the lessons learned, isn't it? And to feed that back into our exercising and our recovery processes and guidance.
Absolutely. So yeah, I mean, some of those groups were even talking about doing some cyber exercises together. So taking that next step of, we've been sharing threat intelligence, could we take some of those examples and even start to role play them in incidents?
That's perfect. That sounds like a really good initiative. Thank you. So I wanted just to touch on the kind of human side. So the other thing we've heard in some quite powerful testimonies today is about like the toll that it can take on the team, and an expectation initially that the incident will be sort of done and dusted quite quickly and then they can just move on. But then it turns out in the event of a data breach, you can be waiting and see if the data might get released at some point. They talk about like the invisible dread of having it hanging over you, or even just rebuilding those systems and repatch. That can take up to a year or 18 months. So these are incidents that last for the long haul.
Yes.
You can't just throw a sort of dedicated small team at it, and it's a really all of staff sort of process, isn't it? And it has a real human cost to it. I wonder if that's anything you can speak to from your own experience.
Yeah, huge. We actually held an executive board incident response exercise recently, and that was the key learning that came out for our execs across all the different business units in BAE was, this isn't something, when you have a massive cyber attack, that's done and dusted in a week or a month. It's stretched out for such a long time, and that changes your frame of reference when you're thinking about it and you're thinking about how you plan for it. You're not just planning for a temporary business disruption. So all the things about how do I make sure my team doesn't burn out? How do I get that collective kind of, we're all in this together as early as possible and we're all supporting each other? No sniff of, right, who is to blame for that? Yes. You've got to focus on the task, focus on containing and working out what's going on before you then move into a lessons learned, not a who's to blame.
That's really good. Yeah, this question of blame feels really important, doesn't it? It feels like, if someone was burgled or a victim of a crime, you wouldn't immediately go to the victim and look at, accusing them of being the cause or making them feel bad about having become the victim of a crime. So it's weird how that does seem to apply in this space sometimes. And it feels like the fear of regulation or the fear of repercussions and penalties, it can drive some of this stuff underground. And it would be preferable, wouldn't it, to make it much more open and blameless, and it's not about that, sort of encouraging people to come forward, isn't it?
Much more, because it's not just major incidents. What it bleeds into is all the little things that happen. So a member of staff clicks on an email that they realise was probably a phishing thing. If you have a blame culture, it bleeds out really fast, and it stops people fessing up when they've made a mistake. It stops people talking about something that they found that was misconfigured that turned out to be a security vulnerability.
Exactly.
So that whole idea of continual improvement you can't do if you've got a blame culture.
Yeah.
It's really important.
Yeah, exactly. So I just wanted to mention that today we are releasing some guidance in the NCSE, which is precisely about this approach to creating an environment where people are free to air their concerns and to raise how they're feeling, and to create a response team that comprises all of your staff and not just a small subset, so that everyone is involved and you're brilliantly sort of communicating throughout all of your teams. Just a few final thoughts from you on what steps should be taken in terms of building your preparations for, in recognition that the worst can happen. What should we be doing? What should organisations be doing to prepare and recover and practice?
I do think that the practicing bit is so important, and it's not just the exec level tabletop exercises which are nice and visible. It's right down to half an hour with the teams on a specific scenario, or how would we detect that, or what would we do in the first few minutes of something like that coming in. The other thing is absolute clarity on decision making and who can make what types of decision, and you wouldn't believe how detailed that gets. But if you don't have those playbooks worked through, particularly in something like ransomware where you haven't got long to mess around, you've got to know who could make the decision on some fairly drastic steps that you might have to take in the first half an hour. So it's only actually, I think, when you start to exercise it down into that detail, like right the way through the organisation with the different teams, to start to appreciate the level of pre-planning and playbooks and different types of playbooks that you need.
Brilliant, thank you. That's a really useful point to end on, the need to really drill down into the detail, practice every step, and be aware of all the decision processes that might be needed along the way. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate your time. Thank you.